Hello, hello. My name is Vincent David. I'm the editor of Spartacist. Trump's comeback, the death of liberalism. Our latest piece written by our comrade Perrault. So let's discuss for a few minutes the significance of Trump's election for the world, for the workers' movement in particular, and for the socialist left, both in the US and internationally. So Donald Trump's election is certainly bad news for the working class and the oppressed around the globe. But, more fundamentally, and if we go a little deeper, Trump's reelection as US president really marks the death blow of the liberal post-Soviet order. So the American empire is obviously not defeated, and liberalism as a political force is certainly not finished. But Trump's comeback really signals that liberalism, which has been the dominant ideology of the Western imperialist ruling classes for the past decades, is dead. The first thing that leftists must understand regarding Trump's comeback is that 2024 is not 2016. So back then, during Trump's first election, he was seen as an aberration. Um, his election provoked a frenetic reaction from liberals who organized the so-called resistance even from day one after his election, and who they really doubled down in defense of the status quo and the progressive values it supposedly stood for against Trump. And then in 2020, Biden defeated Trump, and populist forces around the globe suffered a series of setbacks in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so these developments were greeted with a lot of relief in Washington, in London, in Brussels, Berlin, and beyond. A sort of mood of like, oh, Trump, populism, COVID, all of this was just a bad dream. But it wasn't. From the humiliating retreat in Afghanistan, from the Ukraine war and the Ukrainian army being ground down by Russia, to Israel's genocide of the Palestinians, to the domestic situation in the US itself, with the American working class having seen a tremendous attacks on its standard of living, the Biden presidency really oversaw during all the time he was in power the continued collapse of the liberal status quo. And the very party supposed to embody global enlightenment, the Democratic Party, oversaw and supported the genocide in Gaza, which is really the greatest crime in generations. And so there was always an air of fatuous optimism hanging around Biden and his administration. But really, militarily, economically, and politically, the ground was eroding from under their feet. And so that is one of the reasons why 2024 is not like 2016. The liberal wing of the imperialist establishment is in a much weaker position than it was uh, 8 years ago or so. And really, the economic basis for liberalism, which was already eroded in 2016, has been really reduced now. And as a result of this, in all Western imperialist countries, the forces of right wing reaction are ascendant. Whether it is Le Pen in France, the AFD in Germany, Reform UK in Britain, Poilievre in Canada, and Trump, obviously. And so this means that yesterday's triumphant liberals are being thrown out one after the other. Kamala mania, the sort of mania that accompanied Kamala's election campaign and sort of incarnated the hope that a non-senile person could keep the status quo going just a little longer, really represented the last burst of energy of agonizing liberalism, sort of the last breath of a dying body. That's what all the celebrities, the Hollywood, the party of the Democratic National Convention was. and it was diluted just as it was short lived. Trump's victory on November 5th both symbolizes and confirms the defeat of the liberal wing of the imperialist establishment. And we can already see a few days after his election how, contrary to 2016, where the liberals were ready to go on the offensive and fight, the liberals, the main representative of the liberal establishment, are already all crawling to Trump or are defeated, demoralized. They have no ground to stand on, really. Because this is not a fluke. The shift away from liberalism has much deeper causes than Donald Trump himself as a politician, social media, disinformation, or all the other superficial explanation that we hear often. At bottom, the election of Trump represents an ideological shift in the American ruling class and is itself a reflection of the decline of U.S. hegemony. You see, when the US stood as the uncontested world power, it could afford the luxury of liberal democracy and values at home and abroad. However, now the US faces increasing pressure on all fronts, and liberalism has simply become an unnecessary hindrance on US global dominance. So you see, there was always a mailed fist under the velvet glove of US imperialism. But now the glove is simply too expensive and it's coming off. That's what's happening right now. And one of the other reasons the liberals won't put up a fight is because Trump's election has really only accelerated trends that were already going on. Because before the US elections, liberals were already ditching their own values as fast as they possibly could. Think of values like open borders, international law, trans rights, multiculturalism, anti racism. All these values were defended for years by the liberal establishment, but in the last few years, they've all been ditched one after the other by these very same liberals. And so finished are the days when the ruling class itself proclaimed to stand for these high principles. Finished are the days of Trudeau, of Jacinda Ardern, of Obama. Now, what passes for left wing in ruling circles is people like Sir Keir Starmer. So, is the situation hopeless? For those who place their faith in the enlightenment of the progressive elites, it is hopeless. Because these progressive and liberal elites, all they can do now is curse the masses as backward and racist while they themselves prepare to crawl in front of reaction. But for us Marxists, it is precisely among the working masses, including the tens of millions who supported Trump, that hope is to be found. Because you see, defeating the liberals is the worst thing that can happen for the forces of right wing populism. Because now they will have to navigate the impossible currents of a collapsing world order. And the right wing populists, like Trump, gotten into office by channeling the deep popular anger against the elite and the deep dissatisfaction which exists at the bottom of US society as well as other societies. And it is one thing to channel this anger against the elite, but it is quite an other to solve the underlying causes of this anger. A lot of people supported Trump because they believed that the status quo was unbearable, that their economic conditions would at least maybe get better, that there would be an end to America's forever wars, that at least society would stop declining. And these are things that Trump and his administration cannot and will not deliver. Trump and his international co-thinker will have no choice but to grind down the working class of the world and to repress them even further, and eventually the masses will turn against them. And so the question of our time really is, in which direction will this energy be channeled? A little over 30 years ago, communism was proclaimed dead, and the triumph of liberal democracy over the Soviet Union in the Cold War was proclaimed the end of history. And now, today, it's pretty clear to everyone that history hasn't ended. And almost everyone knows or feels that liberal democracy is utterly bankrupt. And as for communism, it isn't dead, but it isn't quite alive also. The forces that claim to fight for communism are splintered, sclerotic, small, and isolated from the working class, and communists have a steep slope to climb. As a new period of right wing reaction opens, it is our task to make up for the lost time and prepare the working class for the struggles to come. Now, there are at least two pitfalls that we can see in the left that, in the coming period. And the first one will be those leftists who will continue to clutch in vain to the coattails of liberals that will, continue to place their faith in the liberal bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie to lead the resistance against Trump and the forces of right wing reaction. All of this will only continue to alienate the working class, push it into the arms of right wing reaction, and guarantees that the left will be an irrelevant factor. And the greatest danger in the coming period is precisely for the left to wait for some liberals to lead the resistance. So that's the first trend. And the second one we can expect is also ultra leftism, because equally bankrupt will be the impulse of some to separate themselves from the masses and seek refuge in abstract phrase mongering about revolution and communism. Both these trends have been dominant in the past decades, and both must be discarded. And the only way Marxists can become a living factor and a real force in the working class movement is if Marxists draw the appropriate lessons from the last 30 years of failure and offer a path of struggle for the working class, which is really in complete rupture with both right wing populism but also liberalism. It is precisely the hegemony of liberalism over working class movement and social movements which have guaranteed their impotence and which have really paved the way for right wing reaction. And so leftists in the coming period must combat any sort of reliance on the liberals. We're already seeing it with organizations like Socialist Alternative. Everything they've been writing since Trump election is all based on the hope that some wing of the liberal bourgeoisie will once again rise up as in 2016. And they're already placing themselves as the foot soldier for some liberal movement. And we're already seeing other groups like the Revolutionary Communist International who have found refuge in abstract phrase mongering about revolution as a false response to the changing world situation. Both these trends are wrong. Both must be combated. So in the immediate period, defensive struggles will no doubt be on the order of the day. And as the liberals abandon the oppressed groups they claim to champion, black people, Muslims, trans, immigrants, women, communists must be in the vanguard of their struggles. Another trend we might very well see are sort of reformist social democrat who will sought to bring back some sort of socialist ideology, but by discarding everything that has to do with combating the specific oppression of these various oppressed groups. We're already seeing it. Some people in Germany or in Britain proclaim to be socialist, but are anti-trans, anti-gay, even often anti-immigrant. So that's also a trend that we must guard against. The point must be to defend all these specific oppressed group in a way compatible with the interests of the broader working class movement and in opposition to the liberals. And that's really what we must seek to do. There will be movement of oppressed groups in society, and the task of communists must be to build these movements, but on a stronger foundations, away from the moralism and sentimentalism of the liberals, as we've seen in the last years, and really tied to the material interest of all workers. Because ultimately, the working class will be the deciding factor. And to win its allegiance, communists must show through the course of the class struggle that unlike the traitors that are leading them today, they, the communists, have a program that can materially advance its interests and lead to its liberation. Like and subscribe, follow us. We will surely publish more on the coming Trump presidency, so stay tuned.